Well, welcome to the Vitalistic Voice. This morning, I'm really excited to bring on a really old friend of mine, Dr. Paul Given. And Dr. Paul has been in practice now for 32 years. And I've had the privilege of knowing Paul for a long time. We actually spent some time in undergrad together at the University of Guelph, and then both ended up at Canadian Memorial Chiropractic College, where we graduated in the same class back in 1993. And Paul has just been rocking and rolling ever since then. So I'm really excited to have you on the podcast this morning, Dr. Paul.
Me too. Really good to reconnect with both of you and Kim.
Cool. Well, this is fantastic. So, I'm so glad that you were able to do this because I have such admiration for you. And I know a lot of my colleagues and friends who have been in practice for a long time, especially, and in your case, you've had your own practice ever since graduating. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, yes.
So 32 years in your own practice. So just tell us what's your journey been like getting, first of all, getting inspired to be a chiropractor, going through chiropractic school, and then starting your own practice and sustaining it for 32 years. What's that been like for you?
I guess the short answer would be it's been awesome. I believe I'm doing what I was put in this world to do. Now, it's also been a roller coaster. There's been ups and downs and sideways over the years, but 32 years in, I'm still wet behind the ears. I still love what I do. But I guess it started originally. Um, I was an underachiever in high school. So other than working my hands and shop classes, I didn't accomplish a lot there. And I remember someone asking me saying, "You're so smart. Like, why aren't you doing anything?" And my answer at the time was like, I have like this high-powered rifle and I got nothing to point it at. So I was kind of bumbling my way through my first couple of years of engineering, and my grandmother was a nutrition fanatic. And she had always preached in our family, and everyone just kind of laughed at her and hid her books behind the toaster and then gave them back a couple weeks later. And my second year, I was looking around and seeing all these people, like fresh-faced, beautiful girls from the year before who were looking rough around the edges, and the same with guys. And I thought, I don't want this to happen to me. So I started devouring her books and reading it and got so obsessed with nutrition that I decided engineering wasn't for me. And so I wasn't really doing much of anything, just kind of reading and studying at home. I had started a successful business that summer, so I was working. And my grandmother kind of confronted me in the middle of a conversation and said, "You know what? You could have been a doctor and taught this to people if you'd set your sights high enough." And at that point, nobody believed in me anymore. And then I realized that she did. And she really spoke into my life. And so one thing led to another, and 6 months later, there I was at University of Guelph, like embarking into a nutrition program. And so that started the whole wellness thing turning. But I had this unstable low back, and it would blow 3 or 4 times a year. I never knew when it was coming or going, and I was getting backed into a corner where I was starting to lose confidence. Um, just one thing after another, I was finding I couldn't do like I wanted to, or couldn't do like things I love to do. And I had done chiropractic in the past on the Band-Aid way. So whenever the house was on fire, I'd go flying into our chiropractor's office in my hometown. And as soon as he'd knocked the rough edges off, it was Dr. Jack Ransbury. He passed a few years ago, but well known and loved man. And so I go into his office, and as soon as I felt better and could bend over and tie up my shoes, I would disappear. And there was one particular time I can remember I was lying on the floor in a dark room with all these pillows around me, trying to find this position that was non-existent, I wasn't in agony. I had this like quiet music on. I thought that was going to be nice, except it was going to hit the end of the vinyl and start skipping. And I didn't know if I could get up even to turn it off. And my best friend's birthday was that night. Everyone was out celebrating, but I was not. I was an avid windsurfer, And I'm a big guy. There's only like a handful of really good days in a summer, and I'd missed one the day before. And I had a big painting contract. I was a contractor. That was how I was working my way through school. It was supposed to start in 3 days, and there was a recession. There weren't many of those. I didn't know if I could start it. What really sucked was the last big one episode had just ended the week before, and here I was again. I felt like everything was passing me by, and my potential was just draining away. It's what ironic. My friends all call me Batman because I was big and I was strong and I could do and I would do things that other people wouldn't, and I felt like a cardboard cutout of a Batman. And so the next day I went into Dr. Jack's office and it was the end of the day, and he asked me to sit down through his report after he adjusted me. And he'd invited me in multiple times, and bless him, he loved me enough to ask me one more time. And I thought, you know what? I'm not going anywhere else. I might as well just sit here. One of the more important decisions I've ever made. Because by the time he was done, he had unpacked this and I understood it. Like what was wrong with me, why it wasn't going away, the progressive nature, how it connected to these other things. 'Cause I had chronic bronchial asthma. I carried an inhaler everywhere. I had been not a super healthy kid. I'd had two major abdominal surgeries by the time I was three. Um, all the growing pains. I peed the bed till I was 11. Like all this stuff at the end that I thought those were all different things. So anyway, I started care with him, and things just layers just came off month by month. The low back thing went away. It never came back. By 6 or 7 months in, I just realized one day I didn't know where my inhalers were. And that was about the time, and I always knew where they were. That was about the time I thought I better talk to this guy. And so we decided this was God's way of telling me I was not to be an engineer. I was going to be a chiropractor. And so the nutrition program just kind of morphed into that. It was just one more layer of like understanding how to get people well and keep them well. Like I've kind of gone on here, but I think that's the gist of how I got into all this.
That's amazing. That is absolutely amazing. And that actually, I think you already answered my next question was, and I remember when we were in school together, you and there was a few other guys that you hang around with, specifically guys, maybe a few of the girls too, but we're very grounded in philosophy. And I remember I wasn't at that point. I had a little bit of an inkling of it, but I wasn't 100% bought into the whole principle of chiropractic. I can be honest and say that. And it wasn't until after I'd gotten into practice where I started going to seminars and started hanging around other people, and specifically it was mentors like Jim Sigafus and Sid Williams, and going to DE and going to some seminars that really permeated my soul to get me understanding the principle at a higher level. But you had that in school. And so I believe, would you agree that that came from your experience being in that office and being subjected to that and feeling that, experiencing the healing for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it wasn't just book learning, I had experience. I also remember in second year looking back at my very inspired application letter and thinking, what's happened to me? Because all of the science and the factoids and the memorizing and the sort of limited scope model that I was being taught under had kind of eroded that away. And one of my better friends, his dad and brother were both established chiropractors. We started spending time with them, for names, Dr. Dunn and Brett Moore. Um, Peter Amringer was a friend of theirs, and we started now hanging out and spending time with established docs who were doing what really what I hoped to do someday. I remember the school's lawyer, Alan Friedman, bless him. I was terrified of him in school, but he became like someone I was quite friendly with after I graduated. But him saying, "You sleep with dogs, you wake up with fleas. You sleep with dogs, you wake up with fleas." And he was talking about things like insurance fraud and doing bad. But I was sleeping with good dogs, and I just kind of woke up with their fleas, and it stuck with me ever since.
That's an awesome analogy. So let me ask you, when you graduated from school, what was the thinking as far as starting your own practice? Did you end up buying a practice, or did you just start from scratch? How did that all come together?
Well, again, I was blessed. There was a gentleman, a doctor who had retired, Dr. John Whitney, and he had started this kind of coaching program for students. He called it Whitney Transition, to learn how to transition from being a student into a doctor, because there's a quantum leap there. And so he really he explained so much, because we didn't learn that stuff in school. There was very little business coaching. So he taught me that. And one of the things he told me was, buy a practice. Find someone moving or retiring, and take over from them. That way you start with a patient base. He says either you kind of start at the top and work your way up, rather than at the bottom. And so many students are told, no, don't do all that, and you just go start from scratch. Don't associate. My gosh, don't associate. Well, I think that's terrible advice, because I started, and it was a very reasonable expenditure to buy this gentleman out. He'd been in practice 42 years, and so I just took over from him. Even at this point in my career, as far as being an associate, there's days I think I would really like to do that. Like, new guys don't understand, because they don't understand all the stresses and costs like we do, because we've been through it all. But so yeah, I started with a fairly modest patient base and a lot of files, and with lots of young energy and ideas in, the whole thing just kind of blew up in the first year.
So what has been the change over the years? So in 32 years in practice, how has your practice changed or evolved? I know your philosophy has been very, very grounded, but how have you delivered that philosophy in different ways? Your adjusting technique, or different procedures, or different tools that you've used?
I'm adjusting very similar to the way I did when I graduated, although there are things, there's so many technique, I'm sure you understand, there's so many technique and systems and approaches. I think, and my belief is that they're like cookbooks. And yeah, if you don't know anything about cooking, you need a recipe. But eventually, at some point, one has to become a chef. And chefs are the one who invent food and recipes and then write them down for other people to do. And so much of what I learn and have absorbed over the years, at some point it just becomes intuitive. So I don't really use any. I have probably 4 or 5 different techniques and systems that are all amalgamated into one. And like it is just the innate sense of what needs to be adjusted. Like
I love, I love that.
there's formulas to find things, but I still believe that's what D.D. Palmer did in the first place. Like, he didn't have anything, not even an idea of what chiropractic was, and he somehow restored a deaf man's hearing. So I'm just able to find things and adjust them, and I know I'm on the right track, because I'm being blessed with like outrageous results. And my patients just tell me, they'll say, "Oh, I got a thing," and I can run my hand down and go, not even touching them, and go, right there. And they go, "Oh, how did you know?" I mean, I'm talking to the choir. You've been through, and you've done the same and more, I'm sure.
This is
So I don't
incredible.
I don't use any. I use Zenith 440 tables. I'm pretty conservative, so low force, and I don't do the old school kind of move everything in the spine and assume one of those will help. I'm very particular. I think spine and nervous system, less is more.
So I love the analogy. I was going to say I love the analogy of learning a recipe and then becoming the chef. I've never heard that before. That's amazing, and that can certainly be applied to your growth in the chiropractic profession. How do you, and you've had great success. You've had a busy practice, a very successful practice for a long time. How do you find educating patients, and how important is it to educate patients on the philosophy of chiropractic, and what strategies do you use to do that and then be successful at that?
Well, I mean, you mentioned some names of like world-changing doctors. Well, I spent time with them and a lot of others, and I found a commonality. Every single one of them um, does a report. He teaches a class with patients starting care. Now, I didn't for the first couple of years, because I'm an introvert, and introverts fear public speaking worse than death. But I had this thing that I was getting more and more bothered by is people would show up. I'd be starting to help them. They'd get some changes and improvement. And as soon as they felt better, they would assume that they were all better because I never explained it, when really all I had done was knock a few of the rough edges off. So they disappear. And then 18 months later, like Mary Jo is back, and it's the same thing as before, Doc, like right here on the left. But I'd examine them, take an X-ray, and it wasn't the same. Because she was in phase 2 of degeneration, and now she's shifting into phase 3. So I can see collapsing discs and spurs on the spine that weren't there before. And I realized I was really just helping them degenerate comfortably. And from a selfish perspective, even at that point, I intended to work for my whole life. Well, I don't want an office full of cripples 20 years from now. So I manned up. The first time I rehearsed and wrote notes and worked on this for weeks. The first time I ever did it was for 6 p.m. I threw up every hour all afternoon until I did that. And I was terrified. And one of my patients afterwards, when I was looking at records, she goes, "We knew you were having a hard time, but we were pulling for you, Doc." And so, like 28 or whatever years later, I mean, I still get a little jumpy about it, but the butterflies, they fly in formation now.
You have some awesome analogies, Paul. You really do. This is fantastic. And so this is amazing really to hear this. And so we talked about this. We had dinner recently and we talked about this, and obviously I have big goals in chiropractic, and I would love to see another school planted in Canada, and especially a school that teaches the philosophical basis of chiropractic and the way to deliver that and educate people. What would you say to students that graduate from a school like CMCC, for example, and many other schools in North America that don't have that solid philosophical basis, and your ability to educate people now, even though it was very nerve-wracking at the beginning? What advice would you give to those students now graduating?
My impression is that that has been gradually amputated from the curriculum to the point where they're not even learning that there is a philosophy to understand. Like I'm pretty disconnected from the educational process, but I just know that new grads I have spoken to, um, I don't even think it's on their radar. So I would just, I guess, my admonition would be is to start going to seminars. Like most of what you need to do really well, you're going to learn after school. Just be open to things and start going to seminars and do some things that may seem uncomfortable. Go to a seminar and listen to someone that you, at this point in your pretty green as grass life, don't even agree with. I remember the first time I heard some philosophy, it was actually Reggie Gold, and I thought this guy's whacked. It was so far beyond even me being pretty inspired by my level of understanding. It all makes sense now. But to just, yeah, seek out and start finding people that are successful in doing what you're doing and start to spend time with them and find out where their well or their fountainhead is. Where are they drinking from? And indulge in it yourself. Because so many people I graduated with who were very, very mechanistic and very pain and strain oriented. And I'd run into them 5 or 10 years after graduation at the same seminars I was at because someone had just opened the door a crack enough for them to let in some light, and they jumped in. And so, I mean, the earlier we do that, the better it is for the people we serve, the better it is for us and our families, and by far the more fun it is.
So let's take it another direction here, and let's say, um, with your experience and learning about chiropractic and having that firsthand experience and firsthand healing, the experience of that healing happening by going to a chiropractor, what would you say to patients that may be watching this interview and have a preconceived notion about what chiropractic is, whether they feel it's some sort of a therapeutic approach or compare it to physio, or maybe they think we're some sort of a quackery or whatever that is. How do you address that? And what would you say to those patients?
First of all, I would ask a lot of questions before I started care with any. I wouldn't just pick a name out of the phone book and go there, or the guy who's close to my home. I'd ask some questions and find out what they hope to accomplish, what's their approach, ask them a little bit about their philosophy. And I would also say, I mean, if you don't have an office that's encouraging you to stick with your care long enough to see structure change and correction, and who isn't, if they are not encouraging you to do some sort of continued care, then I would respectfully suggest that you look somewhere else. In some of my story, I've had enough trauma to kill a football team. I should be dead or crippled multiple times. And but I've been under regular care my whole adult life, like going on 43 years now. And I mean, I'm strong. I can do whatever I want to do. I have no limitations whatsoever, and that's not how it's supposed to be. So yeah, I would just find somewhere that you feel good with the individual, that you understand their philosophy and their approach and what they're hoping to accomplish for you, and then stick with it. It's like the gym. New Year's, there's lots of like 3 week wonders who are there and they're gone by the middle of February. But I was just talking with a gentleman yesterday. I met him. I was out of the loop for a few years, just with a lot of stresses and business things going on. So I started again last January, and we were talking about the New Year's, or he was talking about the New Year's, the new guys coming in. I said, Brian, I was one of those last year. He goes, yeah, but you stuck with it. You're the 1% that stuck with it, and look at you now. Because I could do some pretty decent full before and after pictures at this point in time.
And I gotta say, so you are a big human being. Like you're a big guy, big, strong
Yes.
guy. And so do you ever have or do patients ever have concerns when they walk in and they see you, at 6'3" and you're what, 240 pounds, I would say. I think that's a pretty accurate guess. We were joking the other day because we were playing guitar when you were over for dinner, and I said something about your hand. Your hands are twice the size of mine. And it's amazing how well you can play the guitar with hands that are so big like that. Um, do you ever find that with patients having any concerns with
I
seeing?
have.
Yeah,
It's funny. At Guelph, I did a second level organic chemistry, and I ended up with the lab partner, this British art student. I have no idea why he was in there. His name was Julian. The first day I shook hands with him, he goes, "Good gosh, man, you got hands like garbage can lids." But yes, like, and I take time to explain that the technique and equipment I use is some of the best in the world, that I have light touch. When I talk about adjusting kids and babies, I tell people, put your finger on your eye. How comfortable are you pushing on your own eyeball? That's how hard I push on a baby's neck. They don't even wake up.
great analogy.
Because I remember a good friend who I played hockey with years ago, and I remember the conversation about his little girl with all these ear infections. He never ever did bring her in. But years later, when she was an adult, we were talking about that, and he said, I was just terrified, Paul. Like, you're so big and she was so little, I couldn't imagine you doing something to her spine. And I said, you know what, Mike, I wish I'd understood how to explain it like now, back then, so that your girl didn't have to grow up with all those problems.
What's your best patient story? After all these years in practice, what comes to your mind when somebody's had a miracle change by coming to your practice, whether it be an emotional change or a physical change or some sort of healing? What comes to your mind?
We need a couple hours. Okay, Marissa, woman's 31 years old. She's got 5 kids. So she comes in because she's got 5 kids in fairly short span of time. Her low back and a lot of pelvic issues. And she's also trying to look after these 5 kids that are from 10 months to 14. And so we're adjusting her. And Within about 3 weeks, she's starting to move and walk better. Simple things at home, like being able to pick the baby up out of the crib or like carry the laundry upstairs. Like there's all these shifts. And on a Monday, she called me in the office and said, we've been in the hospital all weekend. Maisie, our 2-year-old, she's got ear infection, and I can hear her screeching in the background. She said, everything they've done hasn't helped. Do you think you could? I said, well, don't know. Um, Bring her in. We'll see if she has a subluxation. And so she brings her in, and she, unhappy little girl, hasn't slept for 2 days. So I get my finger on there, and the atlas, the first bone in the neck, I can feel it's like a marble. It's hard on this side. I said, well, if it's okay with you, let's adjust her. We went through all of the informed consent you're supposed to. But I just sit her in my lap and put my fingers on here and I just hold that. And after about a minute and a half, I feel it go soft, almost like kind of like butter melting. And she gives a big sigh and just kind of slumps back against me. And she called the next day and she fell asleep on the car on the way home and slept for 24 hours straight. So the next week, she brings in Teddy, the baby. Now he's got all red, crusty eyes, just nasty looking, and a whole cheek full of eczema, and he's never slept through the night. So I check him, and we start him getting adjusted. And then the next week, she brings in Casper. He's 9. Now he's got severe ADHD, and he's got this Tourette's kind of facial tic where he goes every couple of minutes all day long. So how do you think that's going at school in the chicken yard? So his upper spine is not in healthy shape either, so we're adjusting him. And about a month later, we reassess everybody. So the little girl sleeping through the night, never had another ear infection. The baby's eyes are white and blue, clear as a bell, and the eczema on his cheek's about this big, and he sleeps all night. I said, well, about Casper, how's he doing? She goes, well, I've had about 6 emails from the teacher about the complete change in him. The Tourette's thing is gone. Um, he's moved up. He's moving rapidly up in both math and reading skills, and he sleeps all night. And that was when her 14-year-old daughter chirped in. She said, it's not just that, because big family, small house, they share a room. She goes, it's not just that, Mom. When he was asleep, he used to flop around like a fish in the bottom of the boat. He kept me awake all night, and now he wakes up in the same position he went to sleep in. So I mean, there's all this stuff we could go on and on and on about. I could spend the day. We could both spend the day just swapping stories, but that was a one that just seemed to affect a whole family on multiple levels. Because what do you think it's like for mom and dad once the kids are all healthy and it's calming down and everybody is sleeping at night? Because if the kids sleep at night, that means mom and dad get to sleep sleep at night too.
Mhm, mhm. So tell me, so let's say I'm a patient and I'm listening to this story and I don't know the principle of chiropractic. How do you explain that happening or as a result of something you're doing to a patient who knows nothing?
I try to keep it as simple as possible. I mean, Gray's Anatomy, chapter 27, third paragraph says nervous system, master system that controls and regulates every single system, organ, and function in the body. Spine's 24 movable bones. That's the shock absorber for the whole body. It's the axis of movement. And the most important, it's a conduit that has to protect that system, the central nervous system, so the brain can control the body and all the things that are supposed to happen for us to function at full potential can do that. And our culture and lifestyle seems devoted to destroying that. So we're technology, we're in front of screens all day. There's all these stresses and overloads in our world. We're not even built to live in the world we live in. And it takes out the spine. And once the spine is injured, it's complex, tends not to heal properly. So now, very quickly, instead of protecting the spinal cord, the central nervous system, it's impairing it. And I tell people, it's like your phone, like relatable terms. I like my phone at 5 bars. I do not like my phone at 3. And we become like 2 or 3 bar phones when the spine is impairing the central nervous system. And how do anybody think they can be healthy or full potential when you're throttled back and bottlenecked like that in the spine? That's the whole purpose of chiropractic is just to restore the alignment and movement integrity so the body can do what God made it to do in the first place. Like it's simple. like it's complex to put into practice, but it confounds men. The truths are greatest truths are so simple. And that seems to be the biggest struggle for people to just grab onto that and believe it enough to follow through and find out, well, yes, isn't that strange? It happened for me too.
I've never heard that phone analogy. That's awesome. I'm going to use that one, Paul. That's great. You know, and I know you're a person of great faith, and I know you wear it on your sleeve. How do you bring that faith and first of all, and let me qualify this by saying, and I've known you for a long time, and you've had some ups and downs and stresses in your life, and you've always shown an incredible sense of gratitude, and I give you tremendous credit for that. No matter where you are in your life, you're still very faithful and very grateful for everything that you have and you've been blessed with. How do you bring that into your practice?
I mean, it is marketplace ministry. I have, especially when I first really got myself reconnected, I was pretty enthusiastic and it doesn't always go over so well. So I think someone really wise a long time ago told me, don't tell me you're a Christian, show me. So I just try to look after people like like our Savior did, heal the sick, tell them the truth when they're ready to hear it. If they ask, I don't proselytize. I don't push it down anybody's throat. But I mean, there shouldn't be any question. You don't have to look too far in my office to see a cross. My adjusting area, it says, we move the bone, God does the healing. I don't take credit for any of that. You know, I don't know how to cure a ham, but a lot of people have got better with doing what we do. And when I do, I give the credit where it's due.
I really appreciate you sharing that. That's great.
Yeah.
Paul, I can't thank you enough for doing this. This has been really, really great. And actually, I got to say, you are a very well-spoken guy. I could sit here and listen to your stories. They're very animated and very engaging. So I appreciate you taking the time to do this.
Well, that's generous of you. But I would have expected no less, Colin.
All right. Well, I want to say thank you very much to Dr. Paul Given, one of the best chiropractors in Kingston, Ontario. So, Paul, thanks again. Appreciate your time.
Yeah, you too, my friend. Bye bye.